Hello, and welcome to Social Founder Stories, the podcast for everyone interested in inspirational stories about charities and social enterprises. I'm your host, Caroline Deal, and I'm the founder of two charities, the Media Trust and Together TV. I well know the joys and challenges of being a social founder. Social Founder Stories are about the amazing people who make social change happen. People who use their passions, skills, and entrepreneurial drive to make a difference and to make our world a better place. You'll hear about what makes social founders tick, how they create impact, what they struggle with, and how they overcome their challenges, or not in some cases. Social Founder Stories is brought to you by the Social Founder Network, in association with Kiva, the Centre for Innovation in Voluntary Action. You can find out more about Kiva and support their innovative work at www.kiva.org.uk. How often we hear in Social Founder Stories that our guests were activists and founders at the youngest of ages. Our guest today, Neil Jameson CBE, when he was a primary school kid, he organised what he would now call a citizens' action to protest against the stopping of free milk for primary school children. Many years later, Neil Jameson went on to found and run Citizens UK, the charity that first campaigned for the living wage, and brought the concept of citizen organising to the UK. Neil has been named by The Guardian as one of the top 100 public servants in the UK. He's also an honorary fellow of Queen Mary University in London and an honorary doctor of the Open University. Neil is a recipient of the Albert Medal from the Royal Society of Arts for reviving the tradition of community organising in the UK and promoting the common good. Prior to founding Citizens UK, Neil, you worked for the Children's Society.
Correct.
And Save the Children, as well as Coventry and Somerset local authorities. I've followed Neil's journey over many years now, always inspired by Neil's dedication and impact and innovation. So I'm really excited to hear your story, Neil, and welcome to Social Founders.
Thank you.
It's a privilege to have you on the show. We're going to go back to how you started Citizens UK and what made you want to start it. But can you just tell our listeners a little bit about what it is, first of all?
Sure.
And then we'll go back to your founder journey.
Which, as you know, is never quite to start Citizens UK. It's a journey which starts in a different way and ends up with a vehicle which is now called Citizens UK. It's a charity company limited by guarantee. It wasn't the original name either. The life of the organisation started in 1988. The charitable objective has changed with the times, I think, and it's often not known the purpose of Citizens UK. We often call troublemakers or campaigning organisation. The charitable objective, which I drafted with the help of the Charity Commission, who were very helpful at the time because we're a one-off, which is to work with and support the development of the people of the United Kingdom to participate in public life. And the second objective is to strengthen the groups they come from. So we're bound in with institutions, and we're a very big alliance now, a diverse alliance of mosques and churches and synagogues and schools and refugee groups and LGBT groups and so on. But you've got to be a group. I'll explain why along the way. But participation is critical to the human condition, I think. And it's even more important now when people are so turned off the vehicles that they think they have for participating. But that's our purpose, is to get people to participate, to teach them and give them the tools to participate in public life in many different ways, but also to strengthen the groups they come from, because all of these groups, in my experience, which have a general charitable objective of the common good, are struggling against the different narrative of social media and individualism and so on.
And lack of time.
Too busy. And the whole point about these groups is they involve lots of people. And the human condition is perverse. And in any church or any mosque or any group, voluntary association, there are eccentrics and what have you. It's good for us to work with a mix of people, but it feels easier these days to just work on your own. In front of a computer screen, press a button, and you think you've done something. You haven't, in my opinion. You've done something, you pressed a button, but basically it doesn't change anything. Thank God we live in a democracy which is vulnerable to large numbers of people being well organised, having a clear objective, raising their own money, and coming up with something which is not going to change the world dramatically, but will change things for many people, which no one else can.
So the old power of social organisation,
Correct.
bringing people together.
It's not a new idea. It's just that people are not participating. Their faith in politics is declined. We've been going for 30 years, so it was pretty good when we started, but boy, currently today, politics is not seen as a vehicle to change. It's seen as something which people despise in many cases, which is why it's easier to have fun, watch something, and
watch Love Island.
Watch people doing stuff. That's why Love Island is the alternative to going to a room, often cold room, few people, some chairs, flip chart, and saying, okay, guys, what are we going to do about this? The drug dealers on our street, the pub that sells alcohol to kids, the fact that streetlights have been broken forever, the knife crime on our street, which is threatening.
So does Citizens UK do quite a lot of local campaigns then?
Yeah, lots.
Because I think of the amazing, huge campaigns, which I hope you'll talk to us about in a minute, are very much part of your brand. But it's interesting what you're just saying there, that you're very much enabling and encouraging people to take action locally.
Yes, I mean, sounds a little bit patronising, but it's like learning anything, I think. Firstly, we have to build the organisation. So we'll talk a bit about power, because that's very important to the philosophy I have learned, the tools I have learned. If you haven't got power, then you've got to limit your ambitions, certainly. But the more power you have, which is the more people in relationships with the same plan, then the more ambitious you can be. But basically, when we're invited to organise in a new town or area, which we are now increasingly, it's best to start with the local issues, the very local issues. We often start, if we get, 4 institutions in a small neighbourhood, mosque, church, school, trade union branch, bring them in the same room, say, okay, what have we got in common? Ideologically, nothing. But actually, everything, if you look at the patch, the neighbourhood is what we have in common. So what can we do about the neighbourhood? What's it like living here? What are the pluses and minuses? Quite quickly, somebody comes up with, the post office is closing. We got no coffee shops or something. Or nobody's trimmed the trees, so they're overhanging the road and it's dangerous. Often it's an issue of safety. Street lights broken. Dog mess. We've done lots of dog mess actions.
So really
very earthy.
On the surface, quite trivial things, which then lead to bigger things.
I mean, these days, suddenly with the problem with the cuts, of course, have led to more serious things, nurseries closing, old people not getting the social care they used to have. So we tend to get escalated quite quickly into issues. If you want to develop people's horizons, you start with things which are relatively local, which are specific issues, like get the lighting improved, get the lighting mended, because you can see if you've done it or not. It's very important for the people that have the courage to participate and go to the demonstration, that we can see you did this, you changed things, you spoke well, you got the mayor to agree to something. And so we do a lot of the pattern for learning in citizens is, it's a Greek word, praxis, which is research, if you like, action and evaluation. Most people don't do the action. They do lots of research, then they don't know what to do with the information, and they rarely evaluate.
And you use the community organiser model still, do you, all the way through?
Totally, yes.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that is and how you came across it? Because I read a story that you'd gone on a Churchill Fellowship.
That's right. You need to look for opportunities as you're getting older, which will help you learn. And certainly I commend the Churchill Fellowships, because I was working at the time in a very run-down council estate on the edge of the city in Coventry, where there was lots of vandalism, so it was not difficult to explain that I need to find out why this is happening, although it wasn't rocket science, the people were poor, the housing was crummy, the facilities had been closed down, so went with that cause. So I had the chance to go to the States, and I saw these magnificent, unique examples of large numbers of people who happened at the time to be Christian, but that didn't really matter because they weren't talking about Jesus or salvation. They were talking about stopping the airport expansion and bulldozing the houses that were lived in by poor folk from demolition without any serious alternative housing. They were doing all sorts of things which we would call campaigning, I guess, here. But I was interested in why and how they were managing to do it and why there were so many people there. And some of them were middle class and some of them were poor. But they were there. The public action was well timed. They always had the media with them. They did something, they got in the press, they met with the mayor, they negotiated, and mostly came up with some sort of compromise.
And then were these the community organisers? Were they branded? Were they called community organisers?
Well, there would be a community organiser probably one person behind that. These would be people from the churches in that time, the Industrial Areas Foundation, started by a guy called Saul Alinsky in the 30s, and he was a criminologist and quite famous, and Hillary Clinton knew about him. Obama was a community organizer, came out of the same stable. I trained with Obama when
did you?
I went there for 10 days to do the same training we run here 3 times a year.
And did you think at the time that this man...
There were 60 of us on it. He stood out because he was young and keen.
And tall.
And tall. And actually, if you've read his Tales of My Father book, he talks about 2 chapters on his experience of community organising. He met Michelle and stuff, and she fell in love with him when he hung his jacket off. It's in the book. With a flip chart and a pen where he's writing up the difference between the world as is and the world as should be. We still do that. That's part of citizens training.
How interesting.
Because the purpose of organising is to help people move from the world as it is to the world as it should be.
So you went over to the States, came across this movement of community organisers and felt there was something happening there that wasn't happening in the UK. Is that
That's correct?
Yeah. So then what happened? You came back and...
Well, I came back. I wondered at one point whether the Children's Society, a big NGO, could basically organise in this way. But the link with royalty meant that basically they couldn't do very much that was radical.
They couldn't campaign.
They couldn't campaign without the permission of the palace, effectively. And that's a choice you make. But basically... I concluded that we needed a new organisation that was focused particularly on this model of organising, which is called broad-based community organising.
Right.
And there's no other vehicle could do it, so I must establish one. I didn't at the time think I should be the organiser, but frankly there was no one else interested in organising. And I was blessed by meeting Eric Adams, who was at the time the secretary of the Barrow Cadbury Trust. I am a Quaker, which is not insignificant because so are they. That's their roots. Right. And that was critical because I had to have a funder to leave the job. So firstly, we built, Eric and I, a little board of trustees, got to what was then called the Citizen Organising Foundation, registered with the Charity Commission.
The Citizen Organising Foundation, I like that name.
COF.
Yeah.
But we talked about following Judeo-Christian traditions, which got us into trouble later on when lots of secular people wanted to join the organisation. Saw the original objectives which they worried about a bit, so we changed them. They were right at the time.
It's interesting, isn't it, the ability to change the organisation.
Sure.
That you don't have to be set in your way as a founder.
Absolutely not the organisation we started, but we needed a vehicle for me to be employed, I felt, as an organiser. Okay, I want to do this for life, if I can, and if I can sustain it. Because another policy which is interesting and has served us extremely well is never taking money from the state. So I knew that the future would be rough, but nevertheless nobody could cut us unless we really messed up. And the foundations lost faith in us.
Was that both a sort of financial policy so that you wouldn't be dependent on the income from the state, but also presumably if you're campaigning for social change, you had to be independent of politics?
Correct. Well, of partisan politics, definitely. But we do politics. It was also because, frankly, that what we're trying to teach people in participation is that power is a good thing with other people. But if you take money from somebody, including trusts, I guess, but it depends which trust you're talking about, then you have to do what the people who give you money tell you to do. And if you take money from the state will say, yes, you can have this, but you must be careful, you can't do this and you can't do the other and so on. But we have really benefited 30 years later now of never taking money from the state. We are blessed by a strong relationship with the radical foundations in this country, some of whom you know, of course, Caroline. Who are prepared to invest in the sort of brief that we had, which was people's participation. We were the first organisation, I think the only organisation, to have this particular charitable objective of helping people participate in public life. This
premise of people participation and social action and engagement is so exciting. Tell us a little bit more about how you used your board and your own personal brand to build up that confidence in what you were doing, being able to raise the money and have the impact. And then I want to hear about the campaigns that you've done as well, because they're so exciting.
Well, the Industrial Heirs Foundation have been great friends to us. We are still in partnership with them 30 years later, and we follow the same curriculum effectively. The same methods, effectively. The tools for community organising are, we think, universal.
Yes.
And so there was a condition that the board members had to go and do a 10-day training with someone, as I did with Obama, where they also were imbibed by, they were challenged by the teaching that there is there.
So you sent them to the States to do the training?
Yes, so Borough Cadbury provided for about 7 of the board members, including Eric Adams, the opportunity to go. The Industrial Heirs Foundation were very gracious and then provided a couple of weeks location placement for the board members. They were all people drawn from the institutions we were focused on. And it's terribly, it sounds spooky, but people came back converted, effectively. We'd got the message, I think, since the welfare state, that we didn't have to do stuff because we were all very well, and the government would do things for us. And in America, they'd never had that position. And so participation was beginning to be an issue. And also what was beginning to happen, which was the most serious, I think, for democracy, is these institutions were struggling to recruit new priests, teachers. The vocation of serving people was seen. Mrs. Thatcher didn't help. She was a bit rubbishy about there is no such thing as society and so on. When actually I now believe absolutely that people have to learn to be Democrats. Cicero said that Democrats are made, not born. And that's totally our experience, that we are born selfish. Aristotle said this. But slowly, as a result of good parenting, and then the experience we have in working with others through institutions, this is ancient Greece, we become more virtuous. So the path to virtuousness comes through parental care. Then the next level in the States, they call them mediating institutions, which we call voluntary associations, I guess. Right. And people learn that actually they should be generous, and there are tools to be generous. And frankly, learning with other people is a great experience, helping other people.
So your journey, you've got a wonderful board who you've sent off on a 10-day training course to the other side of the world. Yeah. You've got unique charitable objectives, which are quite radical in their own way. You've got some money now, which will guarantee you a salary for how long, roughly?
3 years.
3 years, pretty good, actually. A wonderful way to start off an organisation as a founder, if you can actually be sure.
Just for one worker, this was.
Yeah, for you,
for
basically.
Me, yeah.
Yes, very important. You have a vision about what you want to do. How did you take it from effectively an idea and one person and a new board into what it is now, a huge organisation with hundreds of member organisations, staff all over the country?
With any idea, I think you have to pilot it and prove that it works. So I guess in the first 10 years, made lots of mistakes. However, I was able to prove that it was possible to build an organisation that was funding itself effectively with help from foundations in the same way as I'd seen in the States. Yeah. So I was living at the time near Bristol, and the job was, which I understood, I made the targets myself, to see if I could get 27 institutions, diverse institutions, to come into an organisation which was called Communities Organised for a Greater Bristol.
Nice.
Which we don't use now, but nevertheless it was a place. And then come up with a political agenda, political like public life, which we could act upon. We had the founding assembly, which are very important for these. So all the groups came together in the Catholic Cathedral in Bristol to pledge to work together on the common good.
Wonderful. That
itself took some doing, but it wasn't difficult. I think once people get the point, which is basically common good, which is an underplayed philosophy, but critical to democracy. The first action we did in Bristol was one of our churches, people were kept awake at night because of what they thought was the railway. They were next to the Templemead station, shuttling their trucks around. And constant clocking and tin noises were being heard. And so when the minister talked to his congregation, we've joined this organisation, we can tackle big things, what's the problem? And they immediately said, the problem is we can't sleep at night. So he did some research with the help of me, because they were all ready to go and demonstrate against the station, and discovered it was a local Calagas factory that employed night workers to move the Calagas stuff around. They followed the noise. Yeah. They're so excited about the whole thing. And, of course, they very quickly get a meeting with the factory manager, and he was very apologetic. They never had complaints, but nobody ever done a research.
And could they make the change happen?
They could easily make the change happen by reducing the night shifts and moving things more quietly.
So the practical thing is there, but what's more important, presumably, is that a whole gang of individuals from different backgrounds realised that they could make change happen.
That's right.
And so I loved the way you were talking originally about power, because power is a word that you don't hear very much in the social enterprise and charity sector.
Sure.
And you're making me think that perhaps we should do a campaign to bring that word back in again, because the social sector in this country and globally has got incredible power.
Sure.
And you are here harnessing this power. And you then started taking what was to become Citizens UK into London, where you've been extremely active in the East End of London, and into how many cities across the UK now?
12, I think we are now.
12
and
cities,
growing all the time.
And growing all the time. I want to jump from this very local action in Bristol around the Calagas stroke trains noise and how you've empowered those citizens to the campaign that, from my perspective, put you on the map big time, which was the campaign around the living wage. Would you say that that's your most influential campaign?
Yes, there's some very concrete things we can show. When people say, what are you most proud of? I'm most proud of our members staying together.
Oh, interesting.
Because without the vehicle for the power, we wouldn't be able to do it. I was invited to come to East London after the Bristol experience, 4 years on. Had to hand over to another organiser, and then they handed over to another organiser. The organiser is very important because they're the people that pull together.
The catalyst.
The catalyst and the teacher and the booking of the rooms and so on.
The organiser.
The organiser.
The community organiser.
We now have something like 45 professional organisers who are very important to the whole vehicle of
across the UK. And they're paid.
They're paid a decent salary, pension and everything, because we don't want them to leave.
And they're paid by Citizens UK.
Citizens UK has a budget of 5 million when we started, and nothing, of course, and then there's a small grant to get me going.
So you up sticks and left Bristol, moved with the family.
The family didn't suit them to leave. The children were taking exams and so on. So I commuted for 7 years.
Whoa.
Because the job was unstable. It could have collapsed at any point. Any mistake or just a foundation saying we're not going to give you any money would have been the end of the whole thing. So it's risky. But then, in my experience, you've got to take risks if you're a good pioneer. And you've got to have courage. Aristotle, when asked what's the most important value, said that courage is the most important of everything else, because without courage, the rest don't follow.
I think that all the social founders that I've met, heard about, that are part of this network are people with incredible courage, actually. Yes. Courage, resilience, and the skills that you've all built up to keep going.
I enjoyed the mission. Every day was a privilege to do this job. As it grew, it got slightly more less satisfying, because I was then dealing, as is ever the case, with disciplinary action and grievance procedures.
And running a big organisation.
Charity and commission audits and all that, which you have to do, of course. But I think I am. I want to be an organiser for the rest of my life.
But tell us about the living wage campaign.
Okay, well, living wage is very important.
Quite groundbreaking. What is the context for that campaign? If you've got summarise that.
Chutzpah follows. Chutzpah is a Jewish expression about sort of surprising things, which involves courage. Came to East London in 1994-5, launched the organisation, which is then much bigger in East London, which is 47 institutions across 4 boroughs. Same thing, mostly faith and a few schools. We have a listening exercise. People talk to each other. What can we do? We've got this power stuff. And actually, then we started on small local issues. But simultaneously, the members were saying, however, we're East London, we haven't got any money, the people are poor, 0-hour contracts coming in.
East London was one of the poorest areas in the whole of Europe at that stage.
Olympics, of course, as well. Oh, yes, very poor. Under many people's comments was, we're poor. What do we do about it? And again, I remember about 1999 we had a gathering of some of the leaders, and we do, at most of meetings, always start with a rounds, people say who they are, and then a question. So what's happening with families in your neighbourhood is a very good question if for anybody that's listening, and they really want sort of authentic politics, it's good to ask about what's happening to families. And in the rounds, the Imam from the East London Mosque and Father John Armitage from East London St Margaret's Church said roughly the same thing. They can't plan ahead. They're not as generous as they used to be. They're under pressure. They've got TVs in their children's rooms, so the kids are being brought up by TV. They don't volunteer like they used to run the church, Sunday school and stuff. Yep. That sort of gave me the authority to say, well, what can we do about it? And I knew that in 1995, our American organization in Baltimore had run a living wage campaign.
So you followed on the idea from the States again.
But we were more ambitious than that. Learning from others is totally important. I mean, there's no such thing, I think, as an original idea. It's just other people's ideas you borrow. And it's good to be good about them.
I love it, because that's so interesting. We should do some research across our founders, actually, because I think a lot of us think that our ideas are original.
Well, we add to them, I guess.
They're not necessarily. So back to Citizens UK.
So we said, okay, why don't we come up with a living wage for London? We knew there was evidence that policemen and nurses and so on get a top-up called London Waiting.
Yes.
But if you're a cleaner, you get nothing. And why don't we set it?
Yeah.
Because then we had the problem was, well, who sets the minimum wage? Well, there is a sort of deal done with business and unions and so on, and still is. And it's announced once a year what the figure should be, based upon really what business can afford, what employers can afford. The radical thing, I think, and we had help from others to do this, and York University played a significant part, was why don't we set it at the cost of living? And I remember we then had women, basically housewives, if you like, who came in with a basket of goods and said how much it cost to live in Tower Hamlets.
Right.
And they sort of put the vegetables on the table, and the academics, the researchers were counting off how much it cost. And then, of course, they said, yeah, but what about childcare? And then they said, what about transport?
Yep. None
of that is taken into consideration when the minimum wage is calculated. And I remember the day when York University sent a figure down, which they worked out should be what people are paid to live off, to survive in London. Because the cost of transport and childcare suddenly pushes everything up. The cost of housing was going up as well. Yes. So we had a big assembly, 1,000 people and 2,000 people in Walthamstow Town Hall, packed to launch the first UK's living wage. The press weren't sure what it was. Andrew Marr covered it
I remember
BBC.
It getting a lot of coverage.
It was on 10 o'clock news.
Yes.
Because it was so...
It was very radical at the time.
Radical, and who the hell are these
Super
people?
Radical. And interestingly, with Brexit, there's been lots of discussion about assemblies coming back into the decision-making process. But you personally and Citizens UK were really, really innovative and radical around the use of assemblies. So this was key to getting the London living wage accepted.
Because if people aren't there, they don't know they've done it. So the assemblies are really the launch of something which has to have a beginning and not an end, but steps where people can say, and we do meet people and get sentimental about it. I was at that first assembly. There are now 5,000 accredited living wage employers. A third of the FTSE 100 companies are paying it. I am now spending time with others outside this country to launch a global living wage initiative.
How wonderful.
Where there will be a world body that works with others at a country basis that come up with a figure in the same way, using the cost of living. It's voluntary. If you haven't got the money, you don't have to pay it. But we certainly question employers when they say we haven't got the money because our shareholders don't want us to do this. In the early days, we then purposely chose strategic targets which involved turnout, health service first. So we took on the hospitals. So we launched it, got some publicity, and then said, okay, who are we going to persuade, force, to pay it? Who's got the money? And our people said, well, our people mostly were cleaners in hospitals in many cases, church people.
The cleaners, I remember the story about the cleaners in HSBC.
Cleaners in So the second target was HSBC. Right. So we struggled with the health service, but persuaded 5 hospitals to introduce this new wage, which we set. And they recognised, because their staff said, well, we have got the money. And though I do remember the chairman at Homerton saying, well, it's cancer operations or cleaners' wages, what would you do? Unfortunately, we had a very good Catholic nun. She said, we do both.
Fantastic.
And people were, with her. Yeah. But the second target was obviously to take on the bodies that had the money. So we had a 4-year struggle with HSBC Bank where we bought shares in the company. We did all sorts of amusing, teasing actions which people loved, although HSBC didn't particularly. To the credit of the chairman, Sir John Bond, he met with us He came eventually to a big assembly we had to celebrate 10 years of the living wage.
Yeah.
And he brought his wife and daughter and said it was the best day of his life. He's a multimillionaire. He was paid £2 million and was an East Ender. And Sir John Bonds basically said, he's with us. He said the banks give lots of money to charity. And the bishop said, John, we are not interested in charity. It's justice we want.
Wow. So you really tapped into the power of the faith groups as well on this one. And the media as well. You've been very good at creating stunts effectively,
yes.
The assemblies, the stunts, the fact that you're bringing together communities that the media normally portrayed as fighting with each other.
Yes.
You brought those communities together.
Yeah.
And very much the seeing is believing strategy as well then.
Indeed. And of course all of them involve people. So we don't really produce reports because they involve researchers and they have their place, but we do public assemblies, public rallies, public what have you. I mean, we then went from there. Living Wage produced a whole series of other challenges for us because we discovered a lot of workers were here with no papers, which is where the Strangers into Citizens campaign came from. And we had 20,000 people, this was 2006, rally in Trafalgar Square, the biggest rally ever in this country in favour of giving people what the press called an amnesty. We called it regularisation because the word amnesty is a bit toxic and people don't like that. If people have been, it's better to talk about a one-off regularisation. Boris Johnson 100% supported that.
And this is, you said it's called the Strangers into
Citizens was there. So each campaign
Strangers
has a name,
into Citizens, yes.
Which was to ask for these people to be allowed to stay, go on a pathway to citizenship. Thousands benefited from that. If you look at the record of what happened, there was never an amnesty. It was below the radar. I can say now, in all honesty, it's definitely happened. So asylum seekers whose papers got lost were given the right to stay. We were at the time working with lots of Zimbabweans and lots of Chinese folk. They all got the permission to stay. There was a sort of clean-up.
You hugely impacted people's lives, haven't you? With the living wage, with the ability to get papers, and then the refugee campaign work that you've done as well.
It continues.
And
yes.
I wondered, are you working in schools?
Yes, lots.
Because presumably influencing young people at that early stage.
Well, as you hear, we mostly started with faith, but very quickly discovered, of course, the energy that young people have, which tend not to be in faith institutions apart from Islam. And so went to schools, recruited schools, primary school, give me a primary school any day.
And you part of the curriculum?
Well, never quite have been. It's really required, I wouldn't say eccentric head teachers, but courageous head teachers who know that they've got to do SATs, their results matter, but also how are they going to develop these children as all-rounders? We played a significant part in the citizenship curriculum, you may remember, that Bernard Crick.
I do remember that, but what's left of that?
Oh, nothing.
No,
it was abolished.
So how do you work in schools now when there isn't that space anymore?
That was a big hook for us to hang it on, and Bernard Crick looked at our work, and we were in the original report as a vehicle to use if schools wanted to join.
Yeah.
But there is still the challenge for, particularly sixth forms and so on, is they want to produce an all-round young person who are very keen on politics initially, or the vehicle of politics, and without organising, then the only thing they can do is really join a party, and they're really at the bottom of the pile. They're not taught much about power as such. They're taught about getting somebody into the seat. So, as I say, primary schools, we've got lots of primary schools in membership. We have growing numbers of secondary schools and sixth form colleges joining. Some student unions join, but they're very flaky because the turnover's so high.
So a school joins, they pay?
They pay, yes. Everybody
and then
pays.
Their students or even their teachers or their cleaners can come along to meetings and assemblies, and so that's how it works.
Meetings, I mean, life is all about meeting rather
Connecting.
than meetings.
Yes.
So the vehicle for organising we call a one-to-one, which is basically what we're having here. Other people may hear us, which is a relational meeting.
Yeah.
And we encourage all our members to do relational meetings with their neighbours, their friends, their kids, particularly when we don't know each other very well, and then with people outside their institution.
So you are becoming like the web of society,
yes. One of our
the
phrases
mesh underneath it
is
all.
reweaving the fabric of society.
I love that, reweaving.
Yes,
the
reweaving, because it
society.
is fracturing, and it was fracturing. It is almost fractured now with the appalling Brexit saga that we have all lived through.
Yep. Let's come on to you again as a founder. So you talked earlier about how you didn't particularly like the change in your role as you're having to run a bigger and bigger and bigger organisation. A lot of our founders, interestingly, talk about it being a very lonely job and finding it hard sometimes to find the personal support and the personal resilience to keep on going, and also to learn delegating skills and things like that. Yeah. Have you got any tips for those challenges? I mean, did you ever feel that kind of you were on your own there? I imagine it doesn't sound like you did.
Particularly, no. I mean, I was blessed by attracting very good colleagues, much younger than me.
Yes.
Frankly, at the time, I purposely targeted the young people that would normally have left Oxford and Cambridge or LSE and could have potentially been members of Parliament. Or go to the city. And part of that thinking was, why should the City of London and Westminster get the cream of the cream when civil society is the most important institution of them all? And civil society is poorly served by professionals. If they're poorly paid, they don't stay very long and they move on. We need the very best in civil society, and frankly, citizens was able to recruit them.
By offering better salaries? Or?
Some security, but more the excitement of the chase, effectively. The task, the mission. That a lot of people who did PPS at Cambridge or somewhere, where they talked forever about politics and in a very boring way, and suddenly they come to our events. It's mostly the big assemblies that have converted people, where they see black, white, brown, young and old, standing shoulder to shoulder, pressure on whoever is on the platform, and whoever's on the platform basically saying, in a democracy, why would I not say yes to your reasonable requests?
So really inspirational, these assemblies.
The assemblies have been fantastic, and they've recruited for us well, and they're polite, and there's no heckling, and basically we give garlands and flowers and so on.
So you're...
So
you were never lonely. You've got the network of incredible support from your board to the young, bright champions that you're bringing in to act for you in the job, and to start to take over. And you have been an inspiration to, obviously, the people who've been part of your network, but to people outside your network as well, to quietly, constantly pushing your values and this vision of community organising, of bringing people together across different groups, of championing those groups that were getting, and still are sometimes getting, absolutely terrible negative media coverage, particularly actually the Muslim community, I would say, in London. You've been almost single-handedly a champion of bringing the Muslim community into integration, into acceptance, into understanding, and taking people into mosques. Very key on all that. Do you feel that the personal brand for a social founder is very important? Is that something that you consciously developed?
And for good and ill, if you like, because we founders don't really want to move on. I think you can't if you're a founder, really, because if you do, that suggests you're a careerist, effectively, and you move on to something else. Citizens has never had 2-year chief executives, effectively. So I did 20 years. I was the first organizer, and then we thought we should have an executive director. And it was natural in a way that it should be me. As I got older, of course, I was very conscious of the need to leave a legacy. And that's important for all of us founders.
And in what sense a legacy? What do you mean?
Well, a person to take over from me.
And did you start cultivating a few people who could do that?
Because as I say, I was blessed by a large number of very impressive young people joining in about 2005, 2006, when we were very active and very public in what we were doing. And also targeting their academic institutions, so that this was a real career, and community organising now through us is a real career. And I was very blessed that my long-term colleague, effectively, of 15 years, Matthew Bolton, was the deputy, then put himself forward to replace me. The trustees advertised all over the world, had a fair, open go. There was a little bit of competition, but basically Matthew has now taken over. So if you like, he's been 15 years.
He is your legacy, as well as this very powerful, strong organisation and your board. And what are you doing now?
Well, emeritus is a title.
What does that mean? Tell me and our listeners, what does it mean?
I hope it means, it's rather up to Matthew and others to say, observers, that we trust you to carry on, but you're not in charge. But
and has that been difficult? Have they done things that you thought,
Not particularly, no. I mean, it's only a year. It will be different. But nevertheless, I'm able to pick and choose. So I'm working, as you implied, very closely with our Muslim members. To be a Muslim in Britain is pretty terrible now.
Very tough now.
It's got worse whilst we've been organised, much worse. 9/11, 7/7. And to be a Muslim woman is very difficult.
Yes.
Getting on the shortlist is very difficult of any job. So to have 4 million people who basically don't feel welcome here is serious for civil society.
So have you set up a new organisation, or is that a rumour I've heard? Is that correct?
Well, you'll see on my card the Centre for Civil Society.
Yes, tell us about that.
Well, it doesn't exist. I have to say to your listeners, it's another vision. I've tried to persuade Queen Mary University of London that they need this and they should host it. But it is a long-term objective, which is to get somebody, academics, if you like, focused on civil society as a separate sector to the state and the market.
Yep.
You know, the market is so well served by business. Every university has a business school.
Yes.
Nobody has a civil society. Academic training for people. In the States and in Scandinavia, there are courses on how to work with civil society. Civil society is seen, as a vital sector in any democratic process. It's where people learn how to work together. And the market, of course, dominates. It's not so much the state, it's the market that is winning on every front.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see if you follow the same strategies with this new organisation as you used 30 years ago. Are there one or two other social founders out there that you really admire?
Yes, I mean, frankly, some of the people that run our trusts and foundations I admire tremendously. They're fellow travellers. Effectively, they have a different job, but they're prepared to risk the money that was left to them in many cases to invest in risky business. So we have had £5 million from the Barrow Cadbury Trust over these years.
Stories aren't told, are they, actually?
No.
The average person in the street doesn't realise what the Trust for London is doing or the Barrow Cadbury Foundation. They are quite
City
radical.
Bridge Trust, Paul Hamlin Foundation, there are lots. Unbound Philanthropy, we're blessed by a dozen foundations consistently putting money into the organisation.
Yeah. And there are also organisations who have had faith in other social founders when they're starting off or at key stages in their careers.
I have benefited from Eric Adams' philosophy about funding. He always said that he believes if you fund somebody who has a track record of success, you fund the person, not the very well filled in application form.
Which comes back to that issue of the brand of the social founder.
The brand and the track record of
and
the
person. Trust and the networking and how important it is to, if you have got those very strong relationships, to hang on to them during your founder journey. And even if you decide to leave and start something else again, keep that going.
Yeah.
So let's move on to a couple of tips before we close.
It is, you have to inspire people. You have to have an idea that inspires, that is different from other people's idea, but is, and it leads to a mission. I'm very proud when I hear major corporations now saying living wage is a mission. They're part of a mission, which is to pay people more money than they have to pay. And that's major corporations. I heard the City of London, who were initially very reluctant to pay the London living wage, but are now champions.
That's
they want
incredible.
the square mile to go totally living wage.
That living wage legacy you've left is just amazing.
So mission is important because it's always been important.
Mission and inspiration.
Lead by example. The chief executive who stays and sitting in front of a computer will never get anywhere. It's tempting because we're drowning in emails, of course. And you have to have some way of getting those deflected from stuff. But I am an organiser and I've continued to organise. I've been privileged to have organisers who let me organise with them and gently do what I try and do. So I think that's very important. Never giving up is one I learnt early on, because there were so many reasons in those early days, which you must have had.
Yeah.
Thinking this is a waste of time, I can't cope. Well, there's lots of easier jobs out there. But frankly, if you've got a mission, you can't really give up. I mean, you can give up when you're drowning. When your head goes under the water, I suppose, it's probably sensible to learn to swim.
Difficult to know when.
But basically, you've got to get around these hurdles. The first 10 years, I would say, hand on heart, we made lots of mistakes and there was internal strife and stuff. But once we got sorted as a result of the confidence of the foundations. It has been a fantastic privilege to get as far as we have. And another mantra which I've learned really from the Americans, which is all organising is reorganising.
Nice.
That you can't continue to do what you've always done. And it's a method, I also learned it from business. Charles Handy I know very well, and I've been a great follower of his books about business and what happens. And he's just produced a book, I think he is in his 90s, called The Second Curve, which is basically arguing if something's going well, you need to immediately start to have another idea. Otherwise, it becomes boring and people begin to leave because there's no adventure anymore. So you still have a goal, the same goal, but all organising is reorganising, and that means changing what you're doing.
A lot of the founders that we work with have that as a real dilemma. Are they, should they be constantly innovating, changing, taking on these second curves, or should they be focusing more on the one way of doing things? And I think that is a real conflict of interest. Yeah. So
you still have the same goal, but basically you can change
you
things.
Package it differently.
Yeah, that's right.
Almost.
And frankly, trusts want that. The trusts want to fund new stuff.
That's a real dilemma for many of us. So getting the balance right between keeping the same overall mission, the same overall goal, but creating innovative ways to reach that goal.
That's right.
And repackaging. Yeah. That's such interesting advice. Well, I think we should probably end there with that really practical piece of advice. We'd love to hear more from you in blogs, and we'll put lots of links through to your website.
Okay.
I can't wait to hear about the new Centre for Civil Society, so important. And meanwhile, many, many congratulations on everything that you've done with Citizens UK.
Okay.
You've been a great inspiration to me and to all of us in the voluntary sector. The community sector, the public sector, the corporate sector, all over, civil society as a whole. And actually, I bet that there are many social founders out there that have been inspired to do what they're doing by you. So there's a web of people out there that, thanks to your drive and your vision and your inspiration and your innovation, are changing the world. So congratulations and thank you. You can follow Neil Jameson on Twitter at Neil Jameson UK, and you can also follow Citizens UK at Citizens UK and at Living Wage UK on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening to Social Founder Stories. I'll really look forward to your feedback. Do subscribe to the podcast. We have some fantastic guests coming up. You can also sign up to our newsletter on our website, socialfounder.org. You can follow us on Twitter at Social Founders, and if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please leave us a great 5-star review. This will really help spread the word. And of course, if you are a social founder, or even thinking of becoming one, let me know. Social Founder Stories is brought to you by the Social Founder Network, in association with Kiva, the Centre for Innovation in Voluntary Action. You can find out more about Kiva and support their innovative work at kiva.org.uk.